Today's episode of Toronto the Politics the Show is brought to you by my friends Oliver Herlahai and Anna Siebert, who paid me $55 as private citizens, not representing any organizations they might be involved with, to say, go enjoy a small business sometime. Thank you to Oliver Herlahai and Anna Siebert, who sponsored this show as private citizens. On to the show. Chris Glover, MPP for Spadina, Fort York.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining me on Toronto the Politics the Show today. Where are we, by the way?
So we're in Little Norway Park. It's the park that Doug Ford seized with Bill 110, seized it from the city of Toronto. It's literally 200 meters from Billy Bishop Airport, right across the channel there.
The news of the day that I think has been on most people's mind has been some expense scandals going on at Queen's Park.
Hotelgate.
Watergate maybe is just, we
Yeah,
could just use that again.
Yes, that's right. That was a hotel.
I'm curious, could you maybe give a bit of an overview of what's been going on and what sort of news has broken over the past week?
What we've been finding out through expenses, the conservative MPPs have been billing tens of thousands of dollars in hotel expenses in Toronto. And if you live within 50 kilometers of Toronto, then you have to, you're not given a housing allowance. If you live beyond it, like if you live in Northwest Ontario, then from Monday to Thursday, you've got they give you a condo in downtown Toronto or an apartment or somewhere to stay, right? But if you're within commuting distance, then the idea is that you're supposed to go home in the evenings. But there were $120,000 worth of expenses, and some of them were really, really questionable. Like Stan Cho, the Minister of
Tourism, Culture, and Gaming.
Culture, yes,
which
yes,
is
yes.
what an interesting role to have, right?
He was touring.
He was doing a lot
He
of
was doing a lot of
he
touring.
was experiencing
so
the culture,
yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah, but he spent $16,000 I think on hotels in Toronto in 1 year. Like it was ridiculous what they were spending on Toronto hotels when he lives in Toronto. And he's also given, as a minister, he's given access to a vehicle and driver. So at the end of the day, he can just ask for his driver to drive him home, or he could take 6 stops on the subway to get up to Willowdale, North York.
Now, Doug Ford seemed to be critical in public. He asked for Stan's resignation from from cabinet. How much do you buy that? Like, do you buy that this was the first that Doug Ford ever heard about this? I mean, do you think if you were expensing hotels, do you think Merit Styles wanted to know about it?
We know it's not, because what we do know is that the Conservatives asked for permission to give hotel expenses if there was a late night sitting. So if the House is sitting till midnight, then people would be able to book a hotel. But that's not what happened. What ended up happening was a lot of Conservative MPPs were using that expense or that excuse and then booking, hotels. Like Stan, a lot of his expenses were in December of last year when there were no night sittings. Every night the House closed by 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
So the question is, what was he doing with those? Why did he want those hotels?
Tourism, Culture, and Gaming, perhaps.
Perhaps.
I'm curious, when you see this trend in the progressive Conservatives, why do you think, what explains this? It feels like there's a cozy relationship between private business and government. It seems like there's a lot of overspending where the value towards Ontarians doesn't feel very clear. Like, what do you think's going on?
I think you're underplaying. I mean, basically, they're just there. So many of them are just there to take advantage of the opportunity to make a lot of money for themselves and live this luxurious lifestyle. Like you look at David Piccini, he was found out to have expense to his riding association, a golf course in Florida and a restaurant in Florida, as well as a bunch of restaurants and hotels in Toronto.
A sushi making class, I believe.
Sushi making class, yes, yes. So it's just like they're using the taxpayer dollars like their personal piggy bank and no accountability. I mean, you saw it starts right at the top. Doug Ford buying a private plane for himself, a $30 million private plane, and no other premier in Canada has their own private plane.
It seems like when you see, your boss making frivolous purchases like that, how can that not rot from the head down?
Yeah. No, the gravy train starts at the top, or the gravy plane started at the top, and it's worked its way down, and people are just taking advantage of it. And the worst part about it from a taxpayer's perspective is that Our hospitals, our colleges, our universities are all being bankrupted right now by this government because they're refusing to put enough money in to fund them. At the same time, they're just squandering our tax dollars on, personal hotels in Toronto when they live in Toronto, on, golf courses in Florida, but also $2.2 billion at Ontario Place, $1.5 billion in the Skills Development Fund, which was just literally, giving money to their donors, giving our tax dollars to a donors. Like there was one that came up a while ago, David Piccini, when he was the Minister of Labor. So he gave $14 million to the CEO, to a corporation, a company that the director of this corporation launched a fundraiser for him in his riding, for his riding association, that raised $120,000. So he raised $120,000 for David Piccini's riding association. He got, this guy, the company got $14 million. That's a 12,000% return on investment. Okay. And then David Piccini uses that money, the $120,000 for hotels and golf courses and limos and sushi making classes, like just squandering it.
I think we have this cartoonish image of what corruption constitutes sometimes, that unless someone is handing you a briefcase full of cash and saying, I need you to vote this way, you know, it's not corruption. But it seems like there's just this more casual and cozy relationship between private industry and public government.
That has been going on for a long time, the out and out experience of this, like usually when a government's caught doing something corrupt like this, they're embarrassed about it. Like the Liberals with the gas plant scandal, the orange scandal, they were at least embarrassed about it. Or their cash for access scandal, where they had corporations and companies, donors having fundraisers, and in exchange these companies were getting contracts or business from the government. Now Ford is just treating it like this is normal. David Piccini, the lobbyists he was giving money to and the donors he was giving money to, that was just one example. Ford's friend who owns a strip club got $10 million for staff training. Okay, that's our tax dollars going to this friend of culture tourism. Yes. But it's just so blatant. So, when this came up, we demanded that David Piccini step down. Like, he's obviously should not be handling our tax dollars. He's not worthy of being a minister in the government. And in previous generations, he would have had to step down. That would have been such a big scandal. But Ford just weathered it. And every day, David Piccini in the House last year was getting up and defending his own corruption, like defending the squandering of our tax dollars. And at the same time, there's no money for public services. They're not investing. We've got 85,000 people homeless. They're selling off the outdoor education centers in our schools. They're cutting staff and programs from our schools. They're saying they can't afford those, but they can afford all these, personal projects of Doug Ford's and all the lavish spending of his ministers.
When we hear about service delivery, what do you think are some of the tangible realities that, are happening at Queen's Park that are changing the dynamics of, Toronto? Like, what are some of the things you're maybe seeing that you can point back to, say, ineffective investment into healthcare expenditures?
I would say the biggest thing, and it's not just Toronto, it's everywhere in the province, 85,000 people homeless. We got an opioid epidemic that's just spiraling out of control. And they're doing everything they can to divert attention from themselves. Right? Housing and healthcare are provincial responsibilities. So that these problems continue to grow is absolutely on Doug Ford and his government. Like, it's a failure of this government. And, the opioid epidemic, I've personally looked for, I've talked to people on the street. I've asked people if I could get you into treatment, into, detox or rehab, would you go? And when they say yes, I get on the phone and I phone to try to find them some treatment. There's none available, and I talked to people who work in the field, and one woman's been working there for 10 years. She said in the last 5 years, she phones on average once a week to try to get someone into treatment. And in 5 years, she's gotten 3 people into treatment. So you're wondering why this epidemic is spiraling out of control, is because treatment is not available.
And it's very upsetting to see that the reaction by some is to say, well, the services are not working as well as I would like them to.
Yeah.
So therefore, what we need to do is pull them back even more. And I think this is
Yeah.
influencing our, I won't ask you to comment on any candidates in the municipal election, but, it seems like now there's this approach of we need to pull back even services on the municipal level
Yeah.
because of, the issues happening on the provincial. How do you think we can do a better job to explain to people these relationships? Like, it feels like there's just a gap in just, I don't know if we need to give, civics retraining, but what is the issue? What's the gap there?
I think the big thing that there's an assumption that people have that governments are operating for their benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The ideology of the current governments, the last bunch of governments has been a neoliberal ideology, which is we're just going to privatize everything. Like it's so much better if our education, our healthcare, our services are all handled by the private sector. Mark Carney's talking about selling off our airports, right? Just like, Mike Harris sold off the 407. Like this was supposed to be good for us. And it ends up being just an absolute financial nightmare for us. And then we, as, community members, as businesses in the local communities, we bear the brunt of it. Like we're bearing the brunt of the homelessness crisis. We're bearing the brunt of the opioid epidemic that's just not being dealt with so that people are on the streets. We're dealing with, our schools, the staff shortages, the number of cuts to programs and services in our schools. It's just devastating to students. And you hear it from every teacher I've talked to in the province says there's a crisis in our schools. But instead of investing money and the resources that we need to actually fix the crisis and to give students what they need, the government's cutting back so that they can create a market for private schools.
We're watching the enshittification of our government services.
Yeah.
And there's this inherent dynamic where it's, I think same way why kids are suffering, it's in large parts because the algorithm is feeding a certain perspective of the world to people, and the over financialization of those technologies. And it all seems like this little dynamic to sell off any of our public services, and give it to people who might be able to make money off of it. I wanted to nail down into something that seems like,
actually, can I pick up on something there? I would say, having sat in the legislature for 8 years now, everything that the government does, this government does, the last government, the last Liberal government, the federal Liberal government, everything they do is to enrich the already wealthy. Like there's this massive transfer of wealth from working Canadians to the very uber rich, right? And you see it, the number of billionaires keeps growing, but the number of people who have no housing keeps growing. The number of workers who have full-time jobs but are staying in shelters or depend on food banks keeps growing because all of the wealth keeps getting siphoned up to the very top. And it's being done through the privatization of our services. It's being done through corruption, with politicians lining their pockets instead of using our tax dollars to provide services. And I'd say the biggest one is the housing market. The corporate takeover, you called it financialization. The corporate takeover of our housing market is the biggest crisis that we are facing in this province right now.
And it's all rested on this assumption of meritocracy, that the people who are wealthy, the people who are succeeding, they've gotten there because they worked hard, because they made good choices. And therefore, if you're suffering, if you don't like this, approach towards privatization, towards, assigning a cost to everything, it must mean you just did a bad job. But it's the people who seem to have had the most advantages, the ones who want to believe that, they've just made good decisions, who are promoting that the most. I think Doug Ford, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, doesn't seem to have any sort of awareness to the people who weren't given the same advantages that he was.
Yeah, no. I mean, Doug Ford obviously inherited his father's business. He went to college for 6 months or something, and at one point, and then moved into his parents' business. So he was born literally with a silver spoon in his mouth. And, I've started 2 businesses. I know there's lots of workers, lots of businesses out there really struggling right now. But the way this government works is if you're connected, if you're making donations to the Conservative Party, then you can get, a huge government handout, like the strip club owner that got $10 million, or the other business owner that, for Piccini, who raised $120,000 and got $14 million of our tax dollars. So it's not a meritocracy, it's just a corrupt cash grab by the already wealthy, using their leverage in order to get our tax dollars handed over to them. Strings on it, no strings attached.
And it seems part and parcel with an approach to education, which aims to maybe make it a little more difficult for people to get the sort of education that might help them understand what's going on in our government. So I feel like every month now I see some new program that the government is no longer going to provide to students. I think now 5-year colleges, aren't being funded either. What's the current state of OSAP changes? And they haven't reversed anything, of course.
No, so they've converted grants to loans. And so, I mean, this is just huge. On the one estimate that I saw was that an average over a 4-year degree, an average university student would take on an additional $15,000 in debt. Okay, that's on top of the $25,000. So it'd be $40,000 of debt to get a 4-year undergraduate degree for students from low and middle income families. If you're from a wealthier family, then your parents are paying for it. So you don't have to worry about the OSAP debt. But this is a downloading of massive debts that are going to take decades to pay off onto low-income students. And then you ask, well, where's all this money going? Well, the money goes to the interest is carried by the government. The interest that students are paying on OSAP goes to the government so that they can spend it on a private spa or a luxury jet or hotel rooms. So the students, really, we need an uprising from young people in this province because you are getting screwed. This conversion of grants to loans for OSAP debt, they are downloading debt that it's going to take decades to pay off onto low and middle income students. And there's been some protests, but really the only way to turn this kind of thing around is to shut it down, like to literally shut down the city, which is what students in Montreal did in 2011, I think it was. They had a massive student strike. People joined in. The government actually had to call an election. They got thrown out because there was such a massive pushback.
Are you calling for a class revolution right now, Chris Glover?
I don't know about a class revolution, but I'll tell you, we are going to continue to get screwed until we stand up and actually demonstrate the power that we have, because we still have a democracy and the power rests with us. So we can change the government, and we need to be doing that. We need to make sure that they are afraid of being changed if they're not providing services that we actually want with our tax dollars.
Can I ask, there's two, you are the official opposition. There are two other three, respect to Mike Schreiner and Ashland as well. That's the other Green Party MPP, right? Ashland?
Mike Schreiner and Ainsley.
Ainsley, apologies. I always cut out when I make a mistake. Don't worry. That's the beauty of having the edit power. Okay. Some recent polling has shown the Liberals with a slight lead over the NDP. Right now, what do you view as the differences between the NDP and the Liberal Party of Ontario? And why do you think the NDP isn't capturing all of that support right now?
I think in the NDP we're getting better at it, but we're not good at telling our story. Like the most important thing that a government does is manage the economy. And if you Google, and anybody watching, Google this, Google NDP balanced budget. There's a report, and it shows that where NDP parties have formed government, we most consistently have balanced budgets. We have the lowest deficits when we do have to run a deficit, and we have the highest wage growth and the highest company profit growth. Because the things that we believe in, the things that we invest in, public education, public health care, affordable housing, that's the foundation of a strong economy. If you want a strong economy, you need workers who are housed, who are well educated, and who are healthy. So when you invest in those things, the economy takes off. But when you squander money on private spas and private jets, and you're handing out our tax dollars to corrupt officials, then it weakens the economy. And you look at, the corruption index, there's one in The Economist. The more corrupt the government is, the less well the economy does. And so we are all paying the price for the kind of corruption that we're seeing under this Conservative government and under the last Liberal government.
And I think when it comes to some of those polling disparities, maybe this might not be the thing you want to talk about the most, but it's okay. I think it's an unfair comparison when you have a party without an established leader. I think there's probably a lot of people who say, and you know what? Whoever is going to lead the Liberal Party of Ontario is going to be this amazing person that
Yeah.
I can imagine how great they're going to be, and I'm not going to have any sort of criticisms of them
Yeah.
yet. And then once there's actually a leader in place, you give the opportunity for people to start throwing things at them.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate Merritt Stiles as a leader so far? What do you think she's
I
done
think
well?
she's starting to get the message out.
Yeah.
She's starting to show who she is. And as people are starting to get to know her
Mm-hmm.
and realize that she is a fighter, that she's fighting against Doug Ford's corruption, and she's unwavering in that fight. And she's also fighting for the things that people care for,
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, housing, education. They're starting to realize they're coming over to the NDP
Mm-hmm.
because they're realizing that we've given the Liberals lots of opportunities. Every time they get into power, they promise to run an NDP government, and then they run a Conservative government. Like Mark Carney. I mean, he was supposedly progressive. At least that was his campaign. But then, as soon as he got in, the first thing he did was give a capital gains tax
Mm-hmm.
reduction to millionaires like himself,
Yeah.
right? And now he's talking about we're under a sovereignty threat. He wants to sell our ports and airports
Mm-hmm.
to corporations, probably American corporations. Like, what kind of stupidity is that to actually contemplate selling our public assets, particularly strategic assets like airports and ports, to American corporations at this moment in time? It shows that they are also, the Liberals, they try to say that they're working for the people, but they're actually working for the corporations.
Can I ask you, Chris, maybe a little bit of a deviation here, but I think an ongoing curiosity I have is, why be a politician? Because it sounds like a really stressful job. There's a lot of stuff going on. Like, why do you think it's important for you to be someone who speaks about these issues? I feel like you're probably one of the better communicators in provincial politics as well.
Thanks.
Why do you think that this is something that's worthwhile for you to spend your time? I'm sure you can get some cozy
Yeah.
job somewhere, not be so upset all the time. Like, why do this job?
Okay, so I got involved 25 years ago. My kids were in elementary school. Mike Harris was the premier.
Mm-hmm.
He was just butchering the schools.
Yeah.
Like, they put the board under supervision, and every week we were getting notifications about what service is going to be cut. They were going to cut the arts and music classrooms. They were going to sell off the musical instruments. Like, they were going to cut the kindergarten in my kids' school. They were going to cut the kindergarten gym class. They were going to cut the daytime custodian from an elementary school with
Mm-hmm.
5. Anyways, I got so angry that I joined a group called the Campaign for Public Education. And we worked together. There were a lot of people at that point fighting for public education, because we realized that Harris's strategy was to undermine the public education
Mm-hmm.
system, to create a market for private schools, and ultimately to have a private for-profit education system where you have to pay out of pocket for your kids to get an education. Just, like it is in many parts of the States and in the UK and in Australia and New Zealand. So we saw this pattern, and they were trying to roll that into Ontario. So that's what got me motivated. I did that for about 10 years just as a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Then I became a school trustee. Now I'm an MPP. So education, fighting for public education is what was the straw that broke the camel's back that got me into politics.
And it must be upsetting to see that. It feels like we're now continuing on that tendency that whenever these conservative governments go in, it seems like they have a very similar playbook time after time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right now, I mean, they are deliberately underfunding and undermining our schools. And, you see it, like, they've taken over. They look at our schools as an asset.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pieces of legislation that they passed last year gives the Minister of Education to sell any school to anyone he wants without having to go through any kind of process. And this is really terrifying for us, especially in Toronto. The TDSB is the biggest landholder next to the city.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at it's just literally billions of dollars worth of public assets and of our schools. And they're looking at them as assets. They're not looking at them as community schools that provide an essential service for our community. They're looking at them as assets, and who can we give those to at a cut rate in order to get more contributions so that the Conservatives can win the next election.
What do you think's happening right now in Northern Ontario around the wildfires?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a any connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. The government has not been investing. I was a forest firefighter,
Oh, I
and
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I'm old. Back in the late '80s, I was a forest firefighter, and the relative to inflation, we were making $5 an hour more than
wow.
forest firefighters are making
Huh.
now. I got hired. They sent me out for 2 weeks of training
Yeah.
in Atikokan at a camp. Now, if you want to be a forest firefighter, you have to pay for the training. You have to
Really?
go to a place like another city for like 10 days of training,
Hmm.
pay $1,200, and then hope that you get hired, right? So there's a real problem getting people to go into forest firefighting because it is a difficult job. You get up in the morning, you might be home for supper, or you might be home in a month. Like they might fly you off to another part of the province. They might fly you off to Alberta if the fires are
Hmm.
bad out in Alberta. So it's an exciting job. I loved the work, but they've made it too hard for people to actually pursue that as a career.
And I can only imagine the scale of the fires, the
Oh,
difficulties as our climate continues to rise. The job must be only getting harder.
yeah,
And I think the big thing I hear about is the temporary nature of the work right now. That they're seasonal employees. There's not
yeah,
full time. When you hear people, not maybe being compensated properly, you can only imagine that the
yeah.
turnover year after year. What I appreciate with Lee's is just what she shared with me was just the amount of institutional knowledge that seems to be lost every season, and that means that just small things like
Yeah.
repairing a plane, ensuring that you have enough crews out there seems to be lost
Oh,
year after year.
there's so much knowledge. Like when I was on the crew that I had, the crew leader
Hmm.
had 10 years of experience,
Yeah.
and he really knew what he was doing. And I would follow him in any fire because I knew we'd be safe, right?
Yeah.
And we had some pretty hairy situations, but it's hard to retain people because even the crew leaders, they get hired and they work for 6 months and then they get laid off for 6 months. And so, in that other 6 months, are they going to come back? Are they going to find something permanent, full time that they
Hmm.
can work at? So it's hard to get crew leaders to come back. It's hard to get firefighters to come back. And I'll tell you, the first year you're out, you're just following directions because, you don't know what you're
Yeah.
doing, right? Like, I mean, we did the training and stuff. So you have some ideas and you have some safety protocols in your head, but, you're following the lead. And then the next year you're making, you might be operating the pump, and
Hmm.
the chainsaw. And then the next year you're actually, maybe navigating a helicopter. So there's skills that you develop year by year as a forest firefighter. And if it's not a permanent full-time job, it's really hard to keep coming back to that.
Mm. There's a lot of bad shit going on right
A
now.
lot of bad shit. I mean, we need it. Yeah, it's very frustrating. I think people are starting to wake up, though. This is the hope that I have. Like they're realizing this government is absolutely corrupt. Our government is mismanaging a lot of the issues, the crises that we're facing in our society:
Hmm.
housing, homelessness, our education crises, the healthcare crisis. Like all of these are because of deliberate government policy.
Hmm.
you know and so people are looking for something different, and I'm hoping they're going to realize that most of the people in my caucus, we got in there because we were some sort of activist. For me, it was
Hmm.
fighting Mike Harris's, and then Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne's education cuts. That's what got me into politics.
Yeah.
you know I Most of us are there because we have something that we are fighting for, and the policies that we're challenging, we're pushing, are actually good for the economy.
This is kind of the thesis of this show is that at a time where it feels like younger people are becoming increasingly aware that maybe we're spending a little too much time looking at politics happening in the US or even in Ottawa and
Yeah,
not enough time considering the politics that are happening in Queen's Park or at City Hall.
yeah,
But unfortunately, that's happening at a time where local news is declining
yes,
precipitously, and
yeah,
what local news station is out there that isn't owned by Rogers or Bell anymore? And so we have this real
yeah,
gap of the information even getting the reach.
yeah,
And so I hope stuff like this can help encourage people to recognize like these are real issues that are affecting you today, and
yeah,
do you want to be in a situation where 20 years from now, we're looking back with fondness at, Doug Ford's education cuts because, one of his daughters has now, has decided to
Yeah.
privatize kindergartens or something, right?
Yeah.
What is your advice, to the activists of today, to the people who want to make a change? What do you think that they should be doing?
I think more than anything else, information is power.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to get information out. And the traditional media, it still has an important role to play. Like, I'm not disparaging traditional media.
There's some great people at the CBC, especially.
Yeah. There's and doing some great
Mm-hmm.
work. But the thing that's been lost is our local media.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Oshawa originally. There's no local Oshawa newspaper anymore. When I was in Geraldton, there was a Geraldton newspaper. Those local voices have been lost. But there's an opportunity for young people to actually become their local voice. And that's and just put the stuff out on social media. Like, I look at what you've got here.
It's crazy, right? Isn't it wild?
I know. Like, I don't know how much your equipment is, but less than $1,000, I think.
Oh, far less than that.
Far less. Okay, so
what was inspirational for me was I briefly lived in Calgary from 2022 to 2025.
Yeah.
I moved there under the Notley government, and then that changed. My joke is I felt like I moved to East Germany like a week before the Berlin Wall went up. And I had this little instance where I was trying to pedestrianize a street over in Calgary. They didn't really like it. But I got a little local news coverage, and I even saw CTV covering me. They had this exact same setup, you know?
Yeah.
And I realized there's a lot of money being spent towards these local news, and what they're doing is that they have these very inflated operating costs, in my opinion. So then in order to justify that, they sell a lot of ads, and they feel like they can't actually dig into the issues as effectively as possible. Sorry, now I'm on my soapbox.
Yeah.
But my concern right now with a lot of this independent journalism, and I think we see it in Toronto, and there's some people have now used their own Instagram pages to run for office.
Yeah.
It feels like the misinformation is also spreading as well.
Yeah.
And there's an unfortunate dynamic where the people who do know the most about these issues, the people who don't work directly in politics, especially the urban planners when it comes to municipal issues, have the most to lose when it comes to speaking publicly. And I don't know how we create a dynamic where like the asshole right, as I like to call it, has a worthy opposition on the left as well. Because it needs to come from people who aren't directly involved in politics.
Yeah.
It needs to be more of a community-led initiative.
This is the challenge always with progressive politics, that I've never been part of a fight where we had a lot of money.
Yeah.
There's two sources of power in a democracy: money and votes. I've never been on the money side. I've always been on let's try to mobilize votes, right? And education, healthcare, all these things. The money is actually on the other side. The privatization of schools, privatization of healthcare, like in Alberta right now,
Danielle Smith.
Bill 11, Danielle Smith, Bill 11, opens it up to private for profit health insurance, which is this is American corporations. And they've got a ton of money to spend on propaganda to try to encourage people to adopt a system that will deny them and their loved ones and their family members healthcare, ultimately.
I think if you want to know what Ontario could look like in the next 10 years under a conservative government, just look at what's happening in Alberta today.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be separatist Ontarians pretty soon.
Yeah. Look at the States. I mean, we're going down the same political path as the United States. Our politics are much more divisive because the right has gone so far extreme to the right. Like, used to be housing, healthcare, education. Those were fundamental policies for any government, conservative, liberal, NDP, didn't matter. You had to take care of those things. And then we debated about the other things. Now, those things are actively under attack by both conservative and liberal governments.
I think I'm optimistic that a post-Trump world will maybe reset the Overton window when it comes to people's understanding of what constitutes corrupt activity.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens for a lot of people is, we take in so much U.S. news and we see Trump's made $1 billion off selling cryptocurrency. Oh, well, what's happening in, Ontario is not that bad. Or even if you are, skeptical of the Ford government, it just doesn't register as much. And my hope is, I don't know if maybe it's going to get much worse. My hope is that in a more normal U.S. political sphere, we we feel like we have the attention, the ability, the focus to be more skeptical of what's going on at home because we don't have a horrible thing happening,
Yeah.
many times magnitudes worse down there.
So you're saying that the corruption bar is now so much higher that the level of corruption we have here in Ontario doesn't seem that bad. The $120,000 on Toronto hotels or the golf course in
I think
Florida.
because how people consume media is they're scrolling through their feeds.
Yeah.
And when you have, Donald Trump is, I don't know, like bombing Iran again and while
Yeah.
making billions of dollars, you're setting your certain expectation for what a bad government looks like.
Yeah.
And then with the next post, and that's just how it happens. Like it's important to recognize all this stuff happens in context. Like you see that and then you say, this is bad, but I've already gotten so upset about Trump that I just don't have the energy anymore to be upset about like mini Trump in Canada.
I would say to people who are scrolling through like that,
stop scrolling.
Stop scrolling. Yes, that would be a good thing. But just also look at your lives right now, particularly young people. We have more wealth, 50% more wealth than we did 40 years ago in Ontario, in Canada. And yet young people's lives are far worse because all of the wealth has been siphoned up to the top, 1 or 2%. And everybody else is so much worse off. Like young people can't afford housing, they can't afford education. Those were fundamental, like a basic apartment on a minimum, like when I was young, and I'm older, I know. But
you're a cyclist, so you look great, Chris.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yay for bike lane. Let's see. But young people just don't get the opportunities. So in 1995, average tuition fees in Ontario, $2,500. And that was for just about any program, law school, med school, MBA, whatever it was, $2,500. Today, an MBA at U of T, I think it's $54,000 last time I checked. Law school, med school are $28,000. An undergrad is $9,000. So everything has gone up much more. And now the government's going to be converting grants to loans so that you actually bear the full freight of that. The opportunities for young people in housing and education are just not the same, even though there's more wealth in the country. And so people need to get upset, and they need, and this is one of the things that I learned actually in politics is like, we're too polite. Somebody's screwing us over. The government is literally screwing over young people. This grants to loans is literally downloading debt, so that they will have more money that they can squander on their pet projects rather than paying for young people's education.
I talk about the algorithm encouraging a very, certain reactionary perspective towards politics. And I'm susceptible to this in this one project. Like, I'm not going to put out content that's not interesting. I'm not going to put out something that's not going to get people's blood boiling a little bit because that's what the engagement demands. But it feels like we've only worked towards one direction and not on the other right now. And I think the hope is that by adding a little more personality and a little more interest into the politics happening at home, you just get people's focus a little bit more.
Can I give you one example
Please.
of a lesson that I learned? So in 2003, the Liberals beat the Harris Conservatives, and they promised to freeze tuition fees. The Harris had quadrupled most tuition fees in the province, right? So they promised to freeze tuition fees. And then they get into power and they say, oh, well, we only promised to do it for 2 years. And I don't know if that was in the fine print in their platform, but anyways. So then they send, and Bob Rae was converting from the Liberals, from the NDP to the Liberals at the time. And his test was to go out and use his NDP credibility and go out and have this dog and pony show where he was consulting about increasing tuition fees. And he came up with this plan that had already been written by the Liberals beforehand. And it said, basically we're going to, increase tuition fees, increase student debt, and we're going to create a parent debt plan. And McGuinty took this, the report was written by McGuinty or somebody in his office before, and I was at some meetings with this, some of the town halls, and students were saying, I can't afford to eat because I'm paying so much in OSAP, in OSAP debt, or I'm paying so much in, housing costs. I can't afford to eat. And I saw Bob Rae there, then a Liberal, saying, oh, well, we have to balance it out between what the taxpayer pays and what the, the student pays. And people were too polite. Like, we should have been yelling at him.
Yeah.
We should have been yelling. And students who were saying, I'm hungry, I can't afford to eat because the cost of education, you know, they should have been yelling at him. They should have created a scene. Sometimes you have to actually create a scene if you're going to get change. Like, this is the purpose of protests, right? Like, you have to be able to show that this is really hurting, you know, and this is hurting the people who are hurting. They got to get up front, and they got to get in the media, and then they got to show that, hey, my friend just went to the ER and waited 24 hours before they were seen by a doctor, right? Student tuition, the kids in school, they're being sacrificed. This generation of students is being sacrificed because this government wants to privatize education, you know, and they've got to be behaving that way. The OSAP grants to loans. Like, I saw students protest. I went to several of the students protest, and it was good that they were out there. You know, kids who had never, in small towns, who had never protested about anything before, were out there. But I look at what Quebec students did in order to stop the tuition fee increases in 2011. It was massive. Like, it was a student strike. They shut down the universities. You know, they shut down the streets. And that's how they got the action that they needed, because the power of money, you know, wealthy people use their money in order to get more power and money for themselves, right? And if we don't fight back as vehemently as it takes, for whatever it takes, in order to get back our power and our money, then we're going to continue to get screwed.
I think it's a great place to leave things, Chris.
Okay.
I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. I mean, one thing maybe I like to leave things off on, maybe sometimes a positive note. But I'm never quite sure, you know. But like, when you look around Toronto, it's a beautiful city. It is a summer. Is there anything you think people should be taking advantage of in the city that they're not already?
I think, you know what, we do live in a beautiful city. We've got a beautiful waterfront. Generally, for most people, you know, life is pretty good. Yeah. You know, we've just got to take care of each other. That's, if I could leave with one message, we need to look after each other. We need to, when someone else is getting hurt by government policies, the homeless, the students, you know, people in hospitals, we've got to stand up for them, because we know that we're going to be next if we don't. And so, you know, building a strong community of people to fight for the things so that we can continue to have a really wonderful city and a wonderful country to live in, that's important. That's what motivates me to be in politics.
Chris Glover, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
That was great. That's good.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening or watching to Toronto the Politics, the show. Send us a little bit of a follow on whatever your preferred streaming app is. If it's YouTube, if it's Apple Podcasts, if it's Spotify. Most modern tech companies have some sort of follow function nowadays. The future, it's crazy. Send this podcast to a friend of yours, because then they'll be like, whoa, I didn't know that you were into like cool local independent news. Do you want to like hang out more? Actually, I've got like a really cute friend that you should start dating. That's right. If you send people this show, you're probably more likely to find love in Toronto. And that is a guarantee. You can find us on Instagram at Christopher Chiasson, or the show at TorontoThePoliticsTheShow. It's all the same stuff, though. It's all the same stuff. You can send us an email at TorontoThePoliticsTheShow@gmail.com. One of these days, someone's going to steal a domain name from me, and I'll feel very bad. What else? I think that's it. You can review. You've listened to podcasts before. You don't need all this advice. You know how it works. I need you to pump up this show in the algorithm, okay? Whatever that means to you, do it. Why? Because this is good. Because this is a good show. I need to stop recording these in the middle of the night. Because I just get increasingly crazy the more of these I do. I do it for you. This is the real show. That interview I did that I spend so long setting up and interviewing people who are very much smarter and have made better decisions in their lives than I have. That's just the preamble. The real show is this last little bit. That's where you see the real Christopher. Not that creation